so cold that when we came in, the water had melted off the boots, but then refroze on the floor. And there's one lady beside my family that was there. Her name was Mrs. Button. I don't remember her first name, I just remember her last name. The only one that made it that way. And she never came back. There wasn't very many people there. And she said, oh, she had been involved in mission work before, and she knew what mission work was like. And she said, I was hoping to find a church where I wouldn't have to be doing everything again. But I remember her coming that one cold morning up there in New York. Oh, it was a cold building. Mom was here, she'd tell you just how cold that building was. She came, and that was the only one that was there that morning. Okay, Shar? I'm going to turn this off up here, okay? Okay,
That helps.
that helps. We're going to look at Isaiah chapter 53 this morning. Guess I'll leave this one here this morning. It says, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? We shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised, rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, he is bruised for our iniquities, the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He is taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? He was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. And they made him a grave with the wicked, and the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servants shall justify many. We will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide with him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death. He was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many. He made intercession for the transgressors. Let's go ahead and go to our Lord. Our Father is coming in the name of Christ. We just ask that you'll be with us. We look upon your word. Lord, that you'll guide us, you'll direct us, and Lord, be able to take this and apply it into our lives this morning. We ask this in your name. As we continue looking at prophecies that relate to Christ and to his coming, Isaiah 53 is probably one of the more popular ones, one of the ones that's known more than anything else. But I want us to take a look at some things in this particular chapter that I find of interest to me anyway. In verse 4 and throughout this psalm, what tense is it written in? It's written in the past tense. It's written as if it's already happened, even though Christ has not come yet. You see, when God talks about something and God says something is going to happen, we can depend upon it to the extent that God is saying it's done. So as you read through this psalm and as you see this psalm, I just want you to note that it is in the past tense. It's the same in Romans chapter 8, where he talks about where we're going to be in the future. He uses the past tense there also to talk about us as already glorified, already in his presence. So as we look at Isaiah 53, we are looking at a promise of God that is so sure that he has placed it in the past tense as if the work has already been done, even though it hasn't happened yet. So we can understand it is going to happen. We look back at the cross and we see the cross from our perspective looking back in history. Isaiah, as he wrote this, the cross hasn't happened yet. He's looking ahead, and yet it is in the past tense because God is so sure of what he is going to do. He begins this psalm with who has believed our report. I like that aspect of things. Even today, as we think about Christianity, and we think about where we are at with God, and we think about as we proclaim Christ to the world, who's believed it? You know, not everyone believes in Jesus Christ. Not everyone accepts Jesus Christ. Not everyone is going to. That doesn't change the fact that it's true. It doesn't change the fact that that's exactly what's going on. But it does tell us very simply, they didn't believe Isaiah either, did they? They didn't believe Jesus Christ himself. You know, they talked to Christ, and the Pharisees at one point said to him, "You're mad. You have a devil." And they didn't believe Christ. They didn't believe what he had to say. And he was God himself. When he kicked out the demons from the madman of Gadarene, what did they do? Did they celebrate that? No, they said, "Get out of here. We don't want you around here." And whenever he had a great following and he began to teach the Word of God, what happened? They all left. And Christ turned to the 12 and said, "Will you leave also?" I always like what Peter says there. Where will we go? You have the words of life. Who hath believed our report? Who believes us? Who believes God? And Isaiah, as he's writing this, he's saying there's a lot of people out there that simply do not believe, that simply do not accept what Christ has to offer. He comes on down in verse 1, he says, "And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" And he's talking about the salvation of God. He's talking about what he has done. Later on in the book of Isaiah, he talks about God bore his mighty arm to bring us salvation. And as we look at what he's talking about, we look and we see the cross of Christ. We see that he has come and he has paid that price for us for salvation. Now, as we think about that, you'll be sitting there or listening on the YouTube, and you'll be saying, "Well, I know Christ." That's the gift that he has brought to us. It's what he has given to us that I want us to look at this morning. Grow up as a tender plant, root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness. And we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. Just an average person. Not the best looking guy. He wouldn't make the top 10 best dressed men in the world or things of that nature. Just an average person. He's despised. Who was and is Jesus? He is the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the one that created the universe. He's the one that spoke, and there it was. You know, I was talking with Mom this past week about the creation. He spoke in 6 days, and he made it all. And we can see that in the Old Testament, and we can see that in Genesis. He is the one that says all things were made by him, and without him wasn't there anything made that was made, in John chapter 1. He is the one that had angels bowing before him, and the one that had the glory of God that Isaiah talks about in Isaiah chapter 6. He is the one that is that one that we look at in the book of Revelation, that when he comes and everything and everyone bows before him, and he comes back in that glory. But when he came, where was Jesus Christ, Lord? In a manger. Where did he live? You know, there are those who will say he was homeless. He wandered about. He went from place to place. He didn't have all the luxuries of mankind. He was despised. The Pharisees, you know, the religious leaders of And the political leaders of his day, did they accept everything he had to say? Or did they reject him? Christ put it this way: if they rejected me, how much more will they reject you? They rejected Jesus Christ. Even when he rose from the grave, they paid the guards so that they'd present a false story. He was despised. I look at that and see that. They did not want to hear what Jesus Christ had to say. They left him. They got away from him. Even as we think about the crowds that did follow him and listen to him, what were they there for? Many times, that's the question that was asked. Yeah, to eat. Feeding the 5,000, 7,000. They were there for various reasons. But where were they on the day of the crucifixion? Crucify him. Crucify him. Rejected. Peter talks about it this way. He says, the stone which the builders set at naught has become the chief cornerstone. And the builders, they were the religious and political leaders, and they got rid of him. But all of Christianity is built upon Jesus Christ. I like what he says. He is despised. He was rejected by men. They didn't want anything to do with him. A man of sorrows. You know why he's a man of sorrows? Because he knew more than anyone else where those without Jesus Christ were going. He was coming to die on the cross, and yet they were going to say no. He was up above Jerusalem, and he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I gathered you together as a hen would her chicks, but you would not. The city that killed the prophets, they got rid of them, and yet Christ crying over the city of Jerusalem. Man of sorrows, because he knew the people he was talking to was going to reject him. Acquainted with grief. How much grief is in that? To know Christ spoke more about hell and about that place of eternal damnation than he spoke about heaven. He let people know where they were headed if they didn't accept him. He talks about how we need to avoid that place. And he talks about if your eye offends you, or your hand offends you, or your foot offends you, you're supposed to cut it off or pluck it out. He says it's better to enter into life clean than into hell whole. What he's saying there is get rid of anything that offends you. The rich young ruler who comes to him and speaks with him. And Christ says to him, one thing you lack. Go and sell all that you have and give to the poor. And it says the man went away sorrowful because he had a lot of wealth. He wasn't the only one who went away sorrowful that day. Christ went away sorrowful. In the book of Acts, Paul is before King Agrippa and his chains. And King Agrippa says to me what's some of the saddest words in the Bible: almost you persuade me to be a Christian. Almost persuade. Christ was acquainted with that grief. Not so much the grief that we'll talk about later, but the grief of knowing we're men without that relationship with him. He comes then to verse 4 to talk about what Christ has done for us and the things that we have in Jesus Christ. I like verse 4. Surely he is born of peace. Again, there's past tense as he comes through all this. And carried our sorrows. Verse 5, he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. By his stripes we are healed. Verse 6, and the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. You look at that list. You look and see what he says there. Our grief is with him. Our sorrow is with him. Our transgression is there. Our iniquity was there. The chastisement for our peace was there. By his stripes we're healed. Our iniquity is there also. John the Baptist, as he looked at Jesus Christ, said, behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. In the book of Ephesians, it says he became sin for us. In other words, Christ became sin for us. The one who knew no sin, he became sin. In the book of Matthew, Christ is on the cross, and he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And the sun became dark as he dealt with our sin on the cross that day. He took upon himself everything that we needed for our salvation. But he also tells us this in Hebrews. He says that we're to come unto that throne of grace boldly to find help in time of need. And backing up in that passage, the reason he can do that, he says he was tempted in all points, yet as we are, yet without sin. Christ knows what we're going through. He bore those for us. I'd like, as I look through this passage and see what he's saying here, he took everything for us. We don't take anything to the cross other than our sin and our problems and give them to him. What do we bring to salvation? Christ did it all. Christ gave his all for us. He didn't hold back. He didn't say, well, okay, and I've heard some people say this, well, he only died for those that were going to accept him. That's not what John the Baptist said. What keeps a person from going to heaven? There's one thing. And that one thing that keeps a person from going to heaven is rejecting the work that Jesus Christ has done on the cross. Everything else is taken care of. My brother puts it this way. It's not a sin question, it's a son question. What will you do with the Son of God? You see, when we think about the gift that God has given to us, we look at a gift that is not just for us, but it's for all. And we look at a gift where God took care of every last aspect of things. Now, I look at Romans again, and I see where he says that we're glorified. We're still here, and we're still facing some things, and we're still having some trouble with some things, but God says the work's complete. It's going to be complete. And listening to David's testimony, and there's things that are going on, and things that are getting better. But God looks at us and it's already taken care of. All that was put on the cross, and our salvation is complete in Jesus Christ. You know, I like what he says as you look through this passage, what Christ has done. But then take a look at the passage and see what man did. Verse 4, we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. And verse 6, we have turned every one to his own way. Oh, if he was really of God, he could come down from that cross, save himself. And then the guys that are on the cross on either side of him would say something like this, well, if you really are the Son of God, why don't you come on down from the cross, and if, just in case, bring us with you. And the title that was put above his head, Pilate, by the way, he said, I have written what I have written. I like that. I'm not going to change that. But it was the King of the Jews. It was to embarrass him, make him less than what he was. Pull out his beard, blindfolded, struck him. Said, guess who hit you? strange way to save the world. I think there's a song entitled to that. What does man look at? Well, if I'm going to be great, if I'm going to have people follow me, then I've got to have some great things going on. I've got to be accepted by all these people. And I have to have all this wealth and all this other things that go along with it. I've got to have people just talking about how wonderful I am. That's not what Christ did. That's not how he came. That's not what he did. And that's not how man accepted Christ. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. And I am so glad for verse 7, by the way. He was in trial before Pilate, and he could have. He was in the garden, and I've said this before, and to me this is one of the greatest verses in the Bible, where he tells Peter to put away his sword, because don't you know that I can call to my Father, and he will give me 12 legions of angels? And I contend if I would have been there and been facing the same type of situation, my response would have been, let's get them. I got 12 legions of angels. You've got a puny little temple guard there. We'll take care of you. But he didn't. He went to the cross. He gave himself for us. And verse 7, he opened not his mouth. That's a good thing. He didn't tell them, he that is without sin cast the first stone, as he did to the woman taken in adultery. He didn't just disappear. He didn't destroy us. He opened not his mouth. You see that twice, verse 7. And that's important. Because there's so much he could have done. When he comes back in the book of Revelation, and we talk about the Battle of Armageddon, have you ever read that battle? Nothing happens except one thing. Christ speaks. And it's over. Here's the one who spoke it into creation. And all he does is speak and it's over. It's a good thing he didn't open his mouth. It's a good thing he didn't say, no, let's get him. Because what would we have? Taken from prison and judgment, who declares generation, is cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken, made him a grave with the wicked, the rich in his death, because he done no violence, nor was a deceit in his mouth. Christ had nothing earthly. When you read through that passage, and very little did he have on this planet. And what they did have, or what he did have, they gambled for at the foot of the cross. He didn't have a whole lot. He lived a fairly poor life. He said he came to seek and to save that which was lost. He walked where he went, had very little. And yet, this man changed the world. This simple person, even our calendars are dated by his birth. Without Jesus Christ, we would have nothing. It's also interesting, without Jesus Christ, news media and the entertainment media and all the political pundits and stuff like that, they wouldn't have anybody to criticize. I guess they'd find somebody or something. But he changed everything. He changed the way everything goes. not by wealth, but by who he was. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Savior. And yes, he was cut off from the living. He's cut off from the world. Crucified by those who believed that it was in the best interest for them. And then he comes on in verse 10 and verse 12. Now I want you just to see a couple things there. Verse 10, you make his soul an offering for sin. And verse 12, because he poured out his soul unto death. Separate from God. Took upon him our sin. And we don't understand everything that happened at the cross. But we do know what he says. He bore the sin of many and made the intercession for the transgressors. Took it upon himself. But Christ is not just at the cross. And the promise of Christ doesn't just stay with his birth and his crucifixion. And it doesn't just stay there in the past. There's also a promise in this passage about the future. And it's in the same tense as what has already happened. So it's just as sure as that it's going to happen as what has already happened that we're looking forward to. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied by his knowledge. My righteous servant shall justify many. And then into verse 12, therefore I will divide with him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong. Christ is coming back. And that's the other promise that's in this particular passage. Christ is going to return. And why can we depend upon that? Because he went to the cross. He did what he said he was going to do on the cross. And one of these days, he's coming again. And so when we think about Isaiah 53, and we think about that passage, we think about not just the cross, we think about the birth, we think about the cross, we think about what that means for us, but we also think about the time when he's coming again. And when he comes again, Philippians says this, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Everyone will bow before Jesus Christ. Everyone will confess him as Lord. You know, the only thing that matters really is when a person does that. We can do it in this lifetime as we have, and it makes a difference. Or you can do it at the great white throne judgment, and it isn't going to make a difference. They'll know who he is, and they'll know what they have done, and they will know that they've rejected him, but it won't matter as far as their salvation goes because it's too late for them. Christ is that King of Kings. Christ is that Lord of Lords. And I don't care if you're the President of the United States or emperor somewhere, you will stand before Jesus Christ. And I don't care if you're homeless and you don't have anything, you'll still stand before Jesus Christ. At the name of Christ, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, because Christ is the one that it's all about. Doesn't matter who you are. Christ is the one who was born in the manger. Christ is the one who lived that life. Christ is the one who went to the cross. Christ is the one who became sin for us and dealt with that. And he's the one who's coming again. Now you think about Isaiah 53. I like what he says. All this is because God wants it. It's his terms. It's what he has. Anything else is a counterfeit. Anything else is worthless. As we think about the promises of God, we think about the things that he has coming for us. We can also look back and we can see Our Father, as we come in the name of Christ, we just ask you to be with us. We do come to the conclusion of this service. Lord, we do ask for safety for those who will be traveling home, and so give them a safe trip there. But Lord, we do ask that we'll be able to look at your word, look at your promise, and see what you have for us. We ask these things.